Hotep family, Aquaba. We will continue our Mdw Ntr lessons with lesson number 5 as we practice reading and writing this sacred script with a focus on Ntr. Along the Nile River Valley, our ancestors represented the idea of Neteru in all living forms. This image represents the Neteret Het-Heru, and Het-Heru will be our primary focus for lesson number 5. Het-Heru here is represented as a sacred cow, or holy cow if you wish, where we see her feeding the Sa-Ra, Amen Mary Ra Meses, also known as Ramesses the Great. The Mdw Ntr symbols for milk are represented by the reed leaf, the all-seeing eye, 2 loaves of bread, followed by the milk jug as a determinative, and the 3 strokes to indicate plurality. So during the occupation by the Romans, or during the Roman Empire, which is the late end of the Egyptian dynastic period, they used the word religio to describe Ramesses' behavior. That word has lost its original meaning over the past 2,000 years. Africans living along the Nile River Valley had a particular reverence towards women, and he imagined his woman as heaven. Here we see her pictured as Neteret Nut, sometimes called Pet, and she is being held up by the 2 columns of heaven. There are other Netru involved in this image, but that's not going to be discussed during this lesson. We can also see Neteret Nut here painted on the top and bottom of the inside of this coffin. Neteret Nut is the heaven above and the heaven on earth. And in both cases, it is represented by an African female. So for our ancestors, seeing the birth of a child and the birth of the son, they identified those as being one and the same, both coming from heaven and going back to heaven. The images of Neteret Nut on the ceiling of temples and tombs is standard along the Nile Valley. So in the casket, the deceased would look up at heaven and lay on the earthly heaven. Inside the casket, we can also see the Mdw Ntr, which is in script form. We can read the sacred symbols inside of the solar disk, and what we can see is from right to left, the new jar, the loaf of bread, and below that is the determinative for Neteret Nut, which is again the symbol of the Neteret with her arms down on one end and her legs down on the other end as heaven. Okay, so before proceeding to new sacred symbols, we will review those that we've seen earlier from lesson 1, 2, and 3. So we have Ma'at, Sat Ra, Henet, Tepi Hert, Taui, Enu, Gert. So in this lesson, we learned Asar, sometimes called Osiris, Sutenhempt, Wert, Nebet, Taui, Nefertari, Mut, and Merit, Ma'a, Karu, Asar, Necher, Ah. I might also note that on the head of Nefertari, Mut, and Merit, we see the vulture, which is a representation of the Netzeret Mut, which is also in her name. And on top of the vulture, we can see a crown, the similar crown that we saw in earlier lessons. So moving on to lesson number 3, we have Ra, Aset, and Nebet Het. I would also modify this at some point to at the top, I would say Ra Kanum, because we see Ra, but that is also a representation of Kanum. So I would say Ra Kanum, Aset, Nebet Het, representing the three Neteru. Then we have the statement Za, Ankh, Jed, West, Seneb, Mehes, Neb. And in the middle, we have Ra, Pu, Hotep, M, Asar. And then on the other side, we have Asar, Hotep, M, Ra. So we could kind of see some sort of symmetry between these two. For lesson 4, we have a focus on Nebet Het. And again, the first column, we would start with Yeti, Nebet Het, Netcher, and that should say Netcheret, Jet, Jetu, Nebet, Pet, and there's our Netcheret Pet again. We can see, hopefully, that is the same Netcheret that I spoke about in the beginning, which we identify as heaven. And we see Henet again, as we saw in lesson 1. I would also modify my transliteration where I have Jeti and Jetu. I think that really, I think the hand and the loaf of bread is a phonetic complements. So I would combine that and just put Jetu and delete the Jetu that comes after. But moving on, then we have Neteru, Itu, Itui, Ker, Ik, Asar, Ken, Suit. And I've come to decide that Ken Suit is actually a name, and it would be the name of the person who this item belongs to. So we have his name as Asar Kensu. That's his Asarian name, or his name as Asar. Okay, on to lesson number 5. We're going to focus on Neteru Het Heru. Het Heru is often shown as a cow, as we saw in an earlier image, as the first image, in fact. And she's shown as a cow with horns and the solar disk between her horns. However, Nechret Heru is also shown here as a woman wearing a crown with horns enclosing the solar disk. So very similar to the way we see heaven, sometimes as a woman, a fully naked woman representing the heaven or the sky above, and then we can see her as a female dressed in female clothing. So we could see Het Heru in the form of a cow, or we could also see her in the form of a woman. So in order to read some of the text from these two images, we'll first identify individual uh, words and phrases from the Mdw Ntr, like we've done in lessons 1 through 4. This template is available in the descriptions, or you could make your own. Okay, so we'll start off with these set of symbols. As you can see already at the bottom, I filled in Ra and Netcher. Again, I'll start at the top, however. So we have the stool and the loaf of bread and the determinative for heaven, and we transliterate that as pet. We saw it also as newt, but it also can be pet. I think pet is specifically talking about the idea of heaven. Then we have the twisted flax, the cup, and a loaf of bread. And below that, we have the 2 tongues of land and another 2 tongues of land. Those are transliterated as Hinet. Again, we saw that earlier in 2 lessons. And the 2 tongues of land, again repeated twice, is Taui, which is representative of Upper and Lower Nile Valley. Then we have the quail chick with the 3 strokes, which represents plurality. And above that, we have the basket. So it's the basket with the chick or quail chick and the plural strokes transliterated as Nebu. So that's the plural of Neb. And as I said, we have the arm and a hand. We have the mouth, the arm and hand, and the solar disk, which again is representative of the Netcher Ra. And below that, as a determinative, we have the seated Netcher, which in this case is a determinative. And of course, you can pause or slow down the speed or do whatever is comfortable for you in terms of writing these out. Some classes I use the spaces in between to practice writing them, and some classes I just ask students to break them out down into parts. So for Ra, I would have the mouth in maybe one space, the arm and hand in another space, the solar disk in another space. It's up to you. So this section starts off with the Ankh and a triangular piece of bread. And we transliterate that as Ankh D. And then we have the symbol of the house containing Heru, which is in fact the name for Het Heru. Below that, we have a column with a tenon. Tenon is a place where columns are connected. Sometimes wood is cut that way, so it has a tenon. So you could connect 2 pieces of wood. And then we have the new jar, and we have the determinative, which identifies this to be a locale or a city. And we would possibly read this as Inui. And we have actually two Ntrs, and these are the names of the Ntrs. And the first one is happy, and it's happy is represented in Mdw Ntr as two parts of a ship, as it's described, a stool and surrounded by two reed leaves. The two reed leaves transliterate as the Y, and the stool is the P, and thus we get the happy. And then we have, again, another part of a ship with a door bolt and a pestle and a reed leaf. And we transliterate that as misty. Right? We did see the part of the ship before in Ma'at. The door bolt we've seen before, that's the S. And the pestle is the T with the reed leaf as the phonetic complement. And below each of those names is the Ntr that they represent. So those are the names of the two Ntrs, happy and misty. So finishing up with our Mdw Ntr symbols, we have the mouth, the placenta, and the scroll or book roll that's transliterated with the letters R, K, H, rec. Then we have the mouth, the ripple of water, and the plural strokes. That's renew. We have the 5-point star, which is sabah. The water pot with water in this case. I forgot to draw the water on my water pot, but it's a water pot with water, transliterated as kab. And we see the below that, I couldn't get this below that, but below the star, we have the symbol for Mut again, and the horned viper and a seated Ntr. Okay, so now if we go back to the original images that we started with, where we see Ntr had Heru in the form of a cow, we hopefully can read some of this Mdw Ntr. It's interesting that they divide the words into columns. So starting at the far right, we have Nebet Pet. And then behind the horns, we have Hinet Taui, some familiar symbols. And then we have Nebu. And we have Arit. I don't think I gave you Arit. I didn't, sorry. So the I with the loaf of bread is Arit. And I think the stroke to the left of that is it is what it is. And then we have Ra at the end of that. So again, Ra is the Ntr Ra. We have Ra as a determinative, so we know we talk about the Ntr Ra. So we have Nebet Pet, Hanet Taui, Nebu, Arit, Ra. And if you remember, I don't really go with a lot of translating because trying to put this in English requires some cooperation, and I'm working kind of on my own on this right now. So if you have some ideas on how you want to translate, you could share with me. I would appreciate that. So as we look at some other parts of the Mdw Ntr, again, divided into columns, which is nice. We see on the far right, we see the names of Mesti and Happy. Right, those are two names. And then we have in the first column on the left, we have rec. Now rec means to know. It's the idea of knowing. And renew and Ren is name. So knowing the names, because that's plural. And below that we have Fedu. Fedu is the number 4, and there's the word Netcher behind that. I didn't say the word Netcher, but so that's 4 Netchers. And then we have Sabah, and Sabah is usually translated as worship. I'm doing translation, which I don't normally do, but these are pretty straightforward. Sabah Mut, so this is worship of Mut, and the F I didn't put in there for whatever reason, so it's F Netcher. So it's by him, and F is he, him, or his. So it's the worship of Mut by him. And then we go to the next column, and we have Kab, which is libation, and Senuef. Senuef is plural for his sons. Okay, so we have some issues with these images because they're damaged, and so I can tell you that there was clearly a Nasubiti that's been kind of destroyed. We can see the white crown of Upper Egypt, so we know there was a Nasubiti there. And above that, I can pretty much be certain that his 2 canoes were above there. But let's do the best we can. So what we have is, starting at the left, we have Ankh D, which is to give everlasting life. And we have Neb, and below that would have been probably Ka'ui and his name or his Shanu. But again, we can't see that. And then the next Shanu would have been his Neb Taui name. So we would have the 2 Shanus under that. And then continuing to the right, we have the name of the Netjeret Het Heru, which is represented by the god Heru inside of the Het, which is the house. So Netjeret Het Heru is, by all symbols, the house of Heru. Heru also being the name that the Greeks called Horus. And below that we have Nebti, which means she is the female lord. And next column we have Inui, which is the name of the locale of the city. I do believe that is commonly called Heliopolis for some reason. I have to check my memory. And we have below Inui, we have Neb again, and that should be Nebti, right? Because there is a loaf of bread, and I didn't write the T, my fault. And below Nebti, we have Pet. So he is also the Lord of the city of heaven, right? Or Pet. And then to the right of that, I cannot identify the red mark. Could be the red crown of Lower Egypt, I'm not sure. But I do recognize the 3 Netjer flags, which is Netjeru, and below Netjeru, we have Nebu. And again, the image below the name Het Heru Nebet is in fact a representation of the Netjeret Het Heru in the form of a female. So not doing any transliteration for this, but just looking at the image, we can actually see, starting at the right, kind of, we could see a Nasubiti. I could tell you that that would be his Horus name, as they call it, or his Heru name, or Heru title above his head, but we can't see the whole body. We can't see that he's holding an Ankh. Um, And then as we, again, moving from the center where we see the Ankh D, we just transliterated that, and somehow we can see that this Nasubiti, again, is being embraced by Het Heru. And then we see these 4 seated Netjeru, and we have their names. And there's some feasting of some sort. They're all holding the flail. The two on the left have the crown of Upper Egypt, sorry, and on the right they have the crown of Lower Egypt, which leads me to believe that that red image is somehow the red crown of Lower Egypt. So we can always identify the Netrut Het Heru by the images on top of her head. Again, we see the horns with the solar disk in between. I do not see her name listed on here, any particular location, but again, these are partial images of the Netrut. We can kind of see the bottom right hand that the Nasubiti is making an offering to her. We could see his name in the Shanu above his head, and I could tell you that that is Men Ma'at Ra, and his other name, looking at the far left, in the Shanu on the far left, we have Ptah, Mary, and Seti. So if we know anything, and I know a little bit, that is the Nasubiti that we identify as Setai 1. But also we have the representation of Het Heru as a cow. Some would suggest that the golden calf that was created at some point in biblical stories is Het Heru. But so we see her as a cow often. We see her as a woman with horns. Sometimes we see her as a woman with cow's ears. So I guess it would not be hard for you to identify this Netrut. Or this Netrut. Now, what we are challenged to do in this modern age is to understand why our ancestors chose this image to represent a female goddess, or Netrut as they would say. There obviously is a reason, and I'll leave that for you to think about. So Shemhotep, this is the end of lesson 5. Lesson 6 should be up shortly. Please share your comments and let me know what I need to do to make this better. Okay? Shemhotep, fam.